speaking Hebrew, please now, and welcome.
The president of Reichman University and founder of ICT, Professor Boaz Ganor. Major General in Reserves Amos Gilead, the director of IPS and former Department of Security in the Defense Ministry, Professor Dima Adamsky, head of honors track and strategy and decision making here at Lauder School of Government and Reichman University, Major General in Reserves Eitan Ben Eliyahu. Boaz, can you please sit there? Amos following him and Dima next to him. Major General in Reserves Eitan Ben Eliyahu, the former commander of the Israeli Air Force. Professor Major General in Reserves Gershon Hacohen, former commander of the Northern Corps. Thank you very much. Hello, ladies. I would like to begin this conference with the words to follow up on what Professor Eichmann has said. I'd like to begin with national resilience, and this component is part of the national views, but we'll begin at the beginning. So this perception that is not formally incorporated into any document, it began with the 18 points of Ben Gurion and went through various formats until recently a law was established and legislated for the strategic defense of Israel, saying that the National Security Council will be the one to formulate it, and it will be actually classified and will not be given to the public. And following the Iron Swords War, this defense doctrine, this defense perception has been raised. Has the doctrine actually been founded on assumptions that are built on misconceptions? Are these misconceptions, together with the renewed doctrines of our enemies, expose us to existential threat? And is this the time for a new defense approach? And we'll discuss all of that now. I will start with you, Professor Ganor. We know that this perception of or a security doctrine is based on the various scenarios. And after October 7th, I'd like to ask you, the threat scenarios of Israel, have they changed in terms of their intensity, but also in terms of their essence, to the point that we are at an existential war? Thank you, Dana. Let's think about it. First of all, we have to think about the three circles of threat scenarios, some of which are concentric, overlapping. The first circle is the circle of the war or the activity against Israel, which is at low intensity, which is basically terrorism, the various terrorist attacks that have been typical before October 7th, from lone wolf attacks to organized attacks to kidnapping attacks and also suicide attacks, where in Israel we have suffered from them in the past and we will suffer from them in the future. Even if tomorrow morning we'll be able to kill the last of Hamas terrorists, I can guarantee that terrorist attacks will continue to be carried out against Israel. So this spectrum exists. But this kind of terror attacks have been joined by another kind, and that is the mass invasion terror attacks. That is what happened on October 7th, a mass invasion attack, and that is something that the terror organizations are looking at. They're seeing that success, and they were surprised because they did not expect it to be so successful. And of course, being so successful means they want to do it again. And we should be taking into account other such mass invasion attacks, not only from the south, but also from other fronts. And so the second circle of threats and scenarios against Israel is conventional warfare, regular warfare, if you will. It is a war that Israel engages in with other sovereign states, And here too there are some lessons to be learned, and probably the next wars, if there will be, and hopefully there won't be, but if there will be, I hope that there will only be many years to come. When they do happen, we have to take into account that we're already talking about multi-front wars and not a single-front war, and that is something that the Israeli doctrine must take into account. And of course, as part of the conventional warfare, we have also experienced things since October 7th, such as drones, several groups of drones, different kinds of missiles, ballistic missiles and other missiles. All of these must be taken into account when we do form this new doctrine. And then we reach the third circle, and that is the non-conventional circle, which is again a spectrum. It can be chemical, biological, or nuclear. And I think that even though we have endured the attack from Iran, we are currently much closer to a nuclear threat than we were ever in the past. And here too I would look at three things. The threat in and of itself, which in of itself is a doctrinal issue, because if you have enemies that are insinuating or explicitly threatening to use non-conventional warfare and nuclear, that already requires a doctrine addressing questions such as whether nuclear ambiguity on Israel's side should continue and so on. And beyond that, we need to take into account the possibility of tactical use of tactical nuclear, or even a use of strategic nuclear, the second blow, etc. So we're definitely at a point in time following October 7th that requires us to rethink and reevaluate the Israeli doctrine. And are we at an existential war under this doctrine? Does this accumulation of events point to an existential war? We have to distinguish between an existential threat and an existential war. I believe that we are not at an existential war. We may get there, but we have not gotten there yet. Despite what the Prime Minister is saying, he has already been saying it. For the first time, he said it 3 days after October 7th that we are at an existential war. We were not at an existential war then. We have not been at an existential war for the past 2 years, and we're not there now. What's an existential war? It's a war that threatens the very existence of Israel. So we are at a justified war. We are self-defense war. We are at a war that we had to go into. However, it is one that is a choice war, one that we have chosen. Doesn't mean that it's not justified, but we have to distinguish between a war that has been elected and a war that is an existential war, because as an existential war, you allow yourself to do things that you will not be doing in any other war. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister has personally used, dozens of times, he has used the term existential war in the context of iron swords, and has used this declaration, this statement, for various needs, some legitimate for strengthening the patriotic sentiment of Israelis, but also for political means. And I will remind you that he told Gantz not to leave the government because we're at an existential war. He said we should fire the head of the ISA because we're at an existential war. So in that sense, this term is being manipulated by him. At the same time, however, we all know, and most of us here Israelis, not all of us, that we are living under an existential threat from the day that this state has been established. That this threat is, and unfortunately this threat will continue to be posed against us until one of three things will happen. With that I will end. 1, peace with our enemies, including those who believe or did believe until October 6th, understand that this is going to have to be postponed. The vision of peace has been postponed now for many years, if it will ever happen. Or 2, our enemies will disappear miraculously and magically. That's one more fantasy. Or the third option is for them to stop hating us. And I don't think that we're helping them stop. Thank you very much. Major General in Reserves Amos Gilead. We don't have a formal doctrine, a formal defense doctrine. You have been talking about that for many years. Do you see that as a problem for Israel's strategy, or is the problem really implementing all of these informal doctrines that have been developed over the years? Well, aside from this very important conference, something else is happening today. Actually, two great things. The first is that the existential threat posed to us actually emanates from the Prime Minister's policy, and I'd like to explain. I don't usually talk about him personally, but as the days go by, I am more convinced of it. Two things are happening now. Instead of us, based on the power of the IDF and the great achievements it has made, to form a strategic Arab axis. Who would have dreamed of it years ago? We have the opportunity to expand peace with Saudi Arabia. We have the opportunity to expand and to strengthen peace with other Arab countries. Now, in Doha, today, in this terror-supporting country that supports the Muslim Brotherhood, they have managed to convene together all the Muslim and Arab states, and all the content, even if it's not operative, they're all against us. Who would have thought that? How did we reach this situation? Second, the Prime Minister just an hour ago at a conference in the Ministry of Finance said that we will be Sparta. He mentioned Sparta and Athens, and he talked about an autarkic economy. And even in the most God-forsaken college, nobody would be learning such idiocy, and anyone who would do so would get 0. What do you mean be Sparta? Anything that we do here, anything we manufacture, we depend upon raw materials from outside Israel, and we cannot be isolated. We're part of the world. Instead, what are we doing? We are now setting up another front. Third, these days I'm becoming convinced that the Prime Minister wants to go into Gaza. It's like going into a black hole and being swallowed up by it. We won in Gaza. What does that mean? We won. As Boaz said, we killed the very last terrorist. That's never going to happen. But let's say suddenly there's an earthquake, 8 on the Richter scale, only in Gaza. So what? Who's going to manage Gaza? Who's going to run this disaster-stricken area? Who? The military regime? Who's the military regime? I was in charge of Gaza twice. Kogat cannot do anything like that. They cannot run Gaza for 5 minutes. The only one who will be able to do that is IDF. So again, reservists, and it will cost us billions. And rebuilding Gaza will cost hundreds of billions, and I'm not overestimating, I'm underestimating. So this can only come from Arab states, it can only come from international coalitions, and the horrors and atrocities that are being shown about us from around the world. Is that what's going to help us? We will be able to manage Gaza. Who's going to make sure that there's water, there's facilities, there's infrastructure? Who's going to rebuild all the structures? Professor Hagai Levine has this whole list of viruses that we may encounter in Gaza. It's the only thing that keeps reproducing in Gaza, that's the viruses. Who's going to make sure, who's going to manage all of that? And it's happening right now. We made peace with Egypt after many blood-filled wars with Egypt. So recently I was told by the Egyptians that they think we don't want peace anymore. If anyone would have said to me in a war game, let's say we would engage in a war game, this is the scenario, and it's an authentic thought, because we want to throw the Palestinians to them. So if we were in Greenland now, I would say that's a wonderful idea, but if we push the Palestinians into Egypt, they view that. The number 2 there in the Egyptian army told me 10 years ago, if you dare do that, there'll be no more peace. And now they're convinced that we're about to do that. And how do they know? One minister in our government is talking about using nuclear bombs to kill them. And the Prime Minister wants to shove them and push them. And they're talking about countries that will take them. Who will take them? Ethiopia will take them? No. Somaliland? Who will take them? It's all just fictitious, and if we push the Palestinians away from Gaza, all the Arab states will stop engaging with us. Now in Judea and Samaria, I don't know if you know, there's a process undergoing there that has not been approved. We have the civil administration there, which is very important, which helps the Palestinians and Israelis work together, but Smotrich has taken over it, and he has his work. He knows exactly what he wants to do. There's the commander there, under him there's a deputy, and that deputy is under Smotrich directly, and it's never been this way. And so they're taking over, all sorts of steps are being taken, and on the one hand there's a very justified war with great achievements in terms of Palestinian terror, but on the other hand they're paving the way for taking over Judea and Samaria. Will we remain friendly with Egypt and the other Arab states? And what will happen in the Jordan? The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan is Israel's strategic home front. A lot of money and a lot of blood is associated with Jordan, and our relations with the Arab states are currently at an all-time low. So I don't have time, but we can only trust Trump. Okay, so how long? Who knows what will happen when he'll wake up in the morning and suddenly Mohammed bin Salman will say enough is enough. Is this how we want to run our policy? Now, everything that's already been said by Professor Reichman about national resilience, if this national resilience will continue to be gnawed at, will continue to crumble, and will turn into some kind of third world dictatorship, we won't be here if we won't be a Jewish democratic state. If the terrible, abominable nation-state law and all the judiciary and everything they want to do will happen, in the absence of national resilience, there'll be no national security. And I think that we have great accomplishments vis-à-vis Iran, Hezbollah, even Dr. Bashar Assad has been exiled. So all of these people have been weakened, and we are weakening ourselves instead of making ourselves stronger. I think that is the origin of all sin. And as for a defense doctrine, I don't think we can even formulate it. We had the Moderator committee that worked within the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Defense at the end of the day, on his last day, approved it, but the Prime Minister didn't approve it. The government needs to approve it. So who approve it? Smotrich? Ben Gvir? Which forces will approve such a defense doctrine? They'll only approve a messianic doctrine, so there needs to be an inquiry committee, and we need to already release the hostages, because that is really going against all the Jewish and Zionist values, and therefore we need to learn lessons. We see that no lessons are being learned, because if you go to the doctor, if you don't have an accurate diagnosis, you can't get medicine for it. Thank you very much. Professor Adamsky, we will try to get your global perspective about the changes that are happening in general in wars, in the character of wars, the nature of wars, and also the actors that are playing parts in them. Changes that are not always dependent upon Israel. And I'd like to ask you, what is the most significant change in your opinion, and what is its impact on Israel and on Israel's defense doctrine as we have one today, or should have one today, following the Iron Swords War? Dr. Wolf, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be in this panel. I want very briefly to talk about the three known unknowns, which I believe are three characteristics of the future battlefield that both Professor Ganor and Major General in Reserves Amos Gilead talked about. And that is probably what the Israeli defense doctrine that Israel needs, and that will be a reality that we are very likely to encounter. And I'm talking about these three things from two perspectives. First of all, that is because I was Amos Gilead's officer when the Moderator committee was underway, and I was involved in it. And it's my experience being part of this diagnosis that Amos talked about, because I think that the Moderator committee had many weaknesses, but also many achievements. And one of the achievements was to be able to diagnose the war, and in some places, based on this diagnosis, to be able to assess and to build force accordingly. So yes, this has a practical value, and I will try to contribute to the practice of identifying the characteristics of a future battlefield. And also, I'm doing this as an academic, as a researcher. I'm now coming back from a sabbatical in Oxford, so it's good to come back to my academic home. In Oxford, I was in Changing Character of War, the program that researches the characteristics of a future battlefield, and my three statements come from that. Dr. Wolf, you said very rightly so that unfortunately as humans, but thankfully as professionals, because like physicians, we need to diagnose war. We have two main learning labs in the world that allow us to think of the future battlefield. The first is the Russia-Ukraine war, and the second is this war here. You can call it the Seventh Front War or Israel's war following October 7th. From these two wars, we learn several characteristics and phenomena, and I would like to emphasize three. This is the main common denominator of both wars and can show what people think about wars today. So the first known unknown is very massive presence of civil society and specifically civic activists on the modern battlefield. And when I talk about civic activists, I talk about a whole range, a whole spectrum, from national security entrepreneurs, those people who are next to the decision makers, and they impact the decision making, even though they are outside the system, until a security industrial mix that is all civil. And this range, this combination, industrial, military, civic, can sometimes bridge gaps or even replace the industrial security capacity of a state. So if we look at the Russian case, the Ukrainian case, and the Israeli case, you can see that the difference, this phenomenon exists in all three places, but the difference lies in the willingness of the defense establishment to co-adapt this, but also the willingness of the system to deal with actors outside the system for better or worse. In fact, the competitive edge or competitive advantage that any institution will have is in the ability to blend the energy that comes from the bottom but with an energy that comes from the top. So this is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is private military companies that are agnostic politically. So usually when we think about proxies or private military companies as extensions of the state, but we're living in an era where we have more and more such actors at a caliber that we have not seen before Napoleon times. And why is this important? Because it greatly intensifies and enhances actor and non-actor states, state and non-state actors, and it makes a state allow themselves to do powerful injections in ways that we did not see before. Especially since when we think about private military companies, we talk about those that provide the fighting on the battlefield. But now what we see is that they take upon themselves roles that are traditionally those of the defense industry and are sometimes in charge of the entire value chain. They can manufacture weapons, they can manufacture command and control systems and intelligence systems. And the last point is actors, that in the absence of a better term, I call them strategic titles, strategic titans. And what are they? These are international corporations, particularly in AI, IT, cloud computing, data centers, space communication, but also manufacturers of weapons that on a global scale that are independent, that do not belong to states. These actors have been given much more gravitas and agency than we have ever seen. And this and the most relevant phenomenon for the future defense strategy is that often these strategic titans have geopolitical views and agendas that do not align with those of the countries from which these corporations or where they are based. And we know very little about how to deter them. We know very little about how to collaborate with and attack them. And we know how these actors can have in-house capabilities for defense, for assault and offense. But we know that in the future we'll need to grapple with them.
Thank you very much. Eitan Ben Eliyahu. This is Major General in Reserves Eitan Ben Eliyahu. Does October 7th stem from failures in security perception or perhaps in failure to implement security perceptions and point of view. I think that this event is affecting and should affect the security approach of the State of Israel. With your permission, I would like to shed some light from a different kind of angle, more of a methodological aspect. I've been accompanying the various opportunities for the past 30 or 40 years in the discussions regarding the security concept of the State of Israel. Every time we seemingly start to build it from the bottom up, all anew. I have studied very meticulously what Ben Gurion wrote at the time, and I want to tell you that it includes almost everything. What I have found, which is very clear in the discussions that we've had, and even in the sessions here, some regard policy, some talk about building the force, some talk about strategy and tactics, and all of these aspects are put on the platform, on the basis of the security concept and the security perception. This also includes protecting the home front. So this is one note here. Apart from the wordings all around, there are 15 clauses for Ben Gurion. He has some sub-clauses. In clause number 15, he has 14 more sub-clauses. All are very short, succinct sentences. And I believe that this, until today, holds about 80% of the entire security concept. I'm going to point out some things that are perhaps irrelevant anymore. Ben Gurion wrote everything, seeing a threat from Syria and Lebanon. And of course, today we have a broader kind of front. I think that he was right, that where the gap in human power and resources is something that we have managed to curb because of our technology. He says this fantastic sentence, we must never rely on past successes, and it's very true even today. There is a point here that definitely needs to be updated, especially following October 7th. He's talking about the speed of recruiting to the military. He says that it should happen 5 to 6 days. He saw how people travel to the borders, which were at the time very close. I think that today we are talking about at least a possibility of fast stop of an attack, because I believe we're going to see more surprise attacks. I think we must assume that these cases similar to October 7th will repeat themselves, and we have to be ready and prepared for stopping the attack at a certain point. Ben Gurion states, quite naively so, he says that we have a spiritual advantage that they do not have. I think that we have learned that they are ready to sacrifice out of a religious, spiritual urge, or no matter what. He also maintains that soldiers must be immediately directed to settlements or other areas. And he says another very important sentence. that is relevant also today. He talks about the structure of the Ministry of Defense, saying that the Ministry of Defense has to be organized in a manner where it does not harm democracy. I think that this is the most important note, and it also reflects later on the structure. And today when we have a minister that goes from one office to another, it's also important. Now 2 or 3 other notes about additions that are not in Ben-Gurion's doctrine. I think that they should be mentioned. I'd like to talk about add-ons. So the first thing, he never imagined such a short time of alert, a surprise to a certain extent. In the 50s, we talked about relying on a large superpower. And nowadays, it's not only relying, it's cooperation and even building coalitions. So in the basis of the doctrine, security doctrine, we have to be ready each and every time for the fact that we have to bring about a coalition. And this also tallies with what Amos said regarding the fact that this was gravely harmed. I think that because of this faraway reserve, and the Qatar attack is also very much of a reminder of that. We need partners in the region, and no less important, we have to be very cautious. And I almost talked about the importance of Jordan and what we are aspiring towards regarding Saudi Arabia as well. We have to see in our doctrine of security, we have to make sure not to harm our political interests with our neighboring countries or countries of the world, for that matter. We could create some political damage that cannot be reversed. And I'd like to take this opportunity and say that the attack in Qatar, technically it was done in an excellent manner. It did fail, and we know why, but it could have had a very grave political damage had we not been very careful and not create and made sure that we cannot harm countries in our region. We have a responsibility. I'll be done soon, says the speaker. We have a responsibility for world Jewry. I don't think that we can see it in previous security doctrines. We see that what we are doing here jeopardizes world Jewry. I think that the longest term damage that this war will cause is anti-Semitism, is harming world Jews. And the last thing, which was already done, and all credit is due to Arendt's, the foreign minister of defense. He established the Home Front Command and our presence in space. I'm saying that our security doctrine obliges us to have presence in space. Everything else will be done by the forces. The communication, the satellites, the resolution, this has nothing to do with the security doctrine. The security doctrine should only state that we must have presence in space. With your permission, we would like to have another round of questions. You don't necessarily think that Ben-Gurion supplies us with a good enough security doctrine. How can we even come up with a security doctrine when we don't agree on the borders? This is a question of essence. Ben-Gurion is definitely fascinating in everything that he wrote down. This is a classical, canon-like text. But Ben-Gurion, writing this, never thought that this will be more than the right thing for that time. He never thought that we will take this into the future for 17 more years and continue thinking that this is the source of our security reasoning. And before I address the question that you raised, we heard previously, what is an existential threat? An existential threat is definitely a term that is context dependent. There is no universal criteria that says from here on you are under an existential threat. So this is culture dependent, expectation dependent, and the definition of the security doctrine as it is in the IDF doctrine, it is defined as dealing with securing the existence and the national essential interests. It is very generalized and it needs more interpretation, of course. And this brings us to the question of territories. I say, and there were very lengthy discussions around this for many, many years, with the Americans thinking that we can prevent terrorism, that we can prevent threats coming from across the border by controlling them from the other side. We have these capabilities to a large extent, but they're not enough. And even before October 7th, I wrote about it. We have no capability of protecting the state of Israel from our shores. And I go back to Rabin, 30 years ago, presenting Oslo, the second Oslo Accords, a month before he was assassinated. He defines three principles. One, unified Jerusalem, extended Jerusalem with Ma'ale Adumim and Givat Ze'ev. The second one, the eastern border, the Jordan Valley. And the third principle, a Palestinian authority, which is less than a state. I think that Rabin was showing us a security doctrine which says if there's complete sovereignty and we are in the 1967 borders, and Jerusalem is divided, we have no ability of protecting the state of Israel. This is an existential threat. I believe that this has to be part and parcel of Israel's security doctrine. We did not discuss it for many years because neither the army nor the governments wished to go into it. And one last thing, within a security doctrine there are some basic assumptions. For example, all of those who were for disengagements, even those that Barak brought up, one assumption said, separating is good for our security, and the saying that good fences making good neighbors turned out to be completely wrong, because the structural arrangement in Gaza is not beneficial for us rather than the hybrid arrangement in Judea and Samaria. Another assumption said that after disengagement and the withdrawal, the government can find it easier to make decisions and to operate in the enemy area. We saw that it was very difficult. And the third principle was that the supremacy of the IDF would enable us to turn things over within 3 or 4 days, and so we can allow ourselves to take the risk. And we also found this to be wrong. What Professor Adamsky discussed previously, there is a willingness to privatize the war, and small groups can create real strategic difficulties for very big armies. And the last assumption was that after we withdraw, if we need to fight again, we're going to have international support. This was also proven to be completely wrong. And these questions must be part of our security doctrine. Thank you very much. Last round of very quick questions. Professor Ganor, complete victory. What does it mean when we try to come up with a security doctrine? What is a complete triumph, a complete victory? What is it? I think that a complete victory is a popular saying regarding the situation we are at right now. Ultimately, a victory is an equation that has many variables, and the military success is only one of these variables. The international status, the political repercussions, the situation of the jury at large in the world, social, economic situations, all of these variables create together, they create victory. And I see ourselves dragged towards that. Perhaps we're winning the battle, but we're losing the whole war. Thank you. Mr. Gilead, the Major General in Reserves. One of the failures of October 7th, what would you change in the security doctrine in this respect? We don't need to change, we need to amend. First of all, there was no intelligence warning. How can it be that they disregarded information? How did they not follow classical models? Technologies assist, but they cannot change basic principles. The second thing, what would I change? We have to investigate what happened. We don't even know until today what happened. This is not a technical issue. If we don't know what happened, we wouldn't know what to do. How did we arrive at a situation where we're financing this cobra snake Hamas, and then we're attacking them? Such mess. We have to follow the road that combines classic principles. This will bring a victory. The ultimate victory in Gaza will be a failure. However, when it regards Iran and Hezbollah, we hit them, we stopped, and we didn't completely annihilate them. So we have to incorporate our wisdom. We have to incorporate it with political achievements. And last but not least, some technical note. We don't even have bodies that are raising their opinions. We see that the professional echelons, if they say something, they're not disregarded. The cabinet does not intervene. We don't have the proper tools and instruments. We have an opportunity and a chance to have great success, but not necessarily under the complete victory and triumph. Professor Adamsky, what about the nuclear aspect of the security doctrine, which of course Israel is not discussing in the open? I'm going to discuss something broader, with your permission. These two wars, these two labs, so to speak, for us to study the Russia, Ukraine, and Israel and its enemies, they're creating new norms with everything regarding our treatment of the nuclear aspect. First of all, we are aware of this erosion of the nuclear taboo. It is now becoming more accepted psychologically speaking and operatively speaking. We're thinking now about all sorts of games or nuclear signals. The second thing, there's very high likability, and maybe later on we'll see players who are talking about countries that are at the threshold of nuclear, a country that can cause their allies and enemies to undertake certain steps. And most importantly, we are in a new ballistic era, where perhaps since the inception of the nuclear era, psychologically it is acceptable, operatively it is very attractive to harm symbolic and strategic goals. We're now 8 years since the inception of the nuclear era. We see attacks against a force. So these are attacks that are meant to harm nuclear sites or nuclear military abilities of other players. This sets new norms, and perhaps we have to go into a third nuclear era where these types of attacks and using a ballistic mass will be more acceptable than in the past. Maybe just a sentence of conclusion here. Well, relating to recent events, one of the fundamental statements that were part of Ben Gurion's Security Doctrine, to continue on Jabotinsky's perception. This is not a mere statement. He said we have to be ready for a round, to end it with an advantage, and to assume there's going to be another one. Whoever assumes there's going to be another round, this affects the way they end the current round. And then I found out that we ended, for example, the Six-Day War at a certain point. Same goes for the Golan Heights, etc. In the Yom Kippur 1973 war, we always stopped at a certain point, and it's true for all of these events. I think that what occurs now is that there is an attempt not to stop, and I think that this raises a question we cannot provide an answer for very quickly. What is this point of stopping? Ben Gurion said there are many more people than us, they have more resources, and no, there's going to be another round. No one has ever delved into the idea of how do we know where is the right point to stop, and now we have no point of stopping. Please, sentence, just a concluding sentence with your permission. We heard, and I hope he didn't really mean it, that Netanyahu said we have to be Sparta. Ben Gurion never saw us as Spartans. His doctrine involved the balance between normalcy and our force of fighting. This balance ended war, and this balance knew that we will be required to fight again. Everything is in these points of balance, and this should be adopted. Thank you very much.
Major General Amos Gilead will remain on the stage so that we can hear his words of wisdom. And I wish to call to the stage Member of Knesset Yuli Edelstein, the outgoing chairperson of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Member of the Knesset, Edelstein also served as the Speaker of the Knesset and ministers in various governments. It is an honor to have you here at